connects. Joe Mixon. Wow! Oh my! Just like that!
Beautiful, accurate uppercut that got him the win.
UFC 2 is most certainly an EA Sports game. In short, it looks great, it plays well, and it has an Ultimate Team mode. It also lacks options, depth, and immersion. Let me preface this review by stating that I am not a fan of mixed martial arts. I don't have any issues with it, but it was just never something that caught my attention. I do love pro wrestling, and that's close enough. There's a lot of crossover between MMA and pro wrestling, so I'm not completely a fish out of water here. Maybe UFC 2 can bridge the gap for me and be the thing that gets me into MMA and the UFC. Who knows? But with that being said, this review is not coming from an expert on the UFC, but I will attempt to break this down as best as I can. In UFC 2, there are essentially two ways to fight, stand up or ground. There's also clinch fighting, but I'm putting that in with the stand-up category. Striking consists of more than just punching and kicking. There are spinning kicks, spinning elbows, spinning back fists, flying strikes, and more. The more experienced and skilled your fighter is, the more options they have at their disposal. You can also block and parry and even catch some strikes and turn them into takedowns. The objective is to submit your opponent, knock your opponent out, or hold the advantage in the fight long enough to win by unanimous decision. Striking your opponent is fun, so much so that the developers added a knockout mode into the game. Knockout mode is your basic fighting game mode, where the first person to a set amount of knockouts wins the match. This is meant for people who just want to throw punches and want a quicker experience. There's no real depth to the mode, it's just there for couch play mainly. The selection of fighters is pretty impressive. There's a fair amount to choose from in each weight division, and there are even more you can buy as DLC. I'm from the old school mindset that when you have characters ready at release, they should be included in the game for free, but most companies these days will make DLC to buy as soon as the game launches. I understand it from a business view, but it's really annoying from a consumer view. The good thing is that you can unlock these DLC fighters in the game by reaching the UFC Hall of Fame in career mode. That's no easy task, however, and will likely take you dozens of hours to accomplish if you don't get it on the first try. Even still, it's good to have the option to unlock these characters in the game. I have much less of a problem with it with this in mind. A big criticism for the UFC games thus far has been that the striking is overpowered and the ground game is too difficult to pull off. I heard the same about this game, so I decided to really try and learn the ground and submission system in UFC 2. I'll admit that the ground system is not easy to understand, and I'll also admit that I still don't fully understand how to defend some of the ground stuff. However, I was able to win most of my fights via submission, even online. What impresses me the most about UFC 2 is the gameplay. In the past, MMA games have felt too stiff. UFC 2 feels controlled. Not too stiff, but not too loose. If you want to try to throw strikes the entire fight, and if you want to try to spam a certain strike, there's a defense for that. If you telegraph your fighting plan, you're going to get put down quickly. For example, I faced an online opponent that kept trying to get me with a diving strike while I was on my back. They would dive, connect, get up, and do it again. I was able to time my block just right, catch them in a submission, and make them tap. If you want to lunge at your opponent every strike, be prepared to take an uppercut or knee to the face. The strategy involved in UFC 2 is what keeps the game fun. Wrestling on the ground feels like a true struggle. I'm so glad we're past the days of button mashing to simulate a struggle. UFC 2 uses the right joystick with the occasional shoulder button modifier to simulate getting into different positions while on the ground, and it works for the most part. My biggest gripe is that the ground defense isn't explained very well in training. I was never really sure when to hold down R2 and really which way I should have been going. That's not to say that you can't defend yourself on the ground, because I definitely came up against online players who knew what they were doing. UFC 2 looks stunning. All the fighter models look fantastic, and I love the damage that accumulates throughout the length of a fight. The hair physics in the game are amazing, quite possibly the best I've seen in any game. Blood gushes and squirts onto the canvas, and if you're playing through an event card, blood will gather and stay on the mat through every fight. Honestly, I'm not sure how this game didn't get an M rating. It's absolutely brutal. How a game like Halo gets an M rating and this doesn't is way beyond me. I mean, I know it's a sport and it happens in real life, but that's really not a good excuse. So if you're a parent watching this review to check it out for your kid, be forewarned, there will be blood, and lots of it. The way the skin reverberates off a strike is fantastic, though the physics are not always on point. There are some goofy things that happen, like fighters falling oddly or KO punches looking soft. The presentation, at first, was impressive, but after about 12 fights or so, it was just the same thing every time. I'm not someone who likes to skip presentation, but there was just no reason to sit through it over and over when there wasn't really anything dynamic going on. The announcing done by Mike Goldberg and Joe Rogan is pretty good. Their excitement levels when a potential knockout is on the horizon always got me more pumped up. That's something we're sorely missing in sports games today, exciting commentary. At times it can sound very canned, but I enjoy the commentary most of the time. Career mode is where I spent most of my time, and it was definitely a mixed experience. You can choose to create a new fighter, or you can choose an established fighter to run with. I decided to make my own and work my way from the bottom. Like I said earlier, my goal was to create a submission machine, just to see if I could. Creating your fighter is an okay experience. It's not the worst and it's not the best. The created fighters look really good though. I just wish there were more options. I mean, I don't expect to be able to wear tassels on my shorts or anything like that. I just wish we could express ourselves a little bit better. One big gripe I have with the creative fighter process is picking your hometown. Why is this not sorted? It takes forever and a day to look through the list, and they're all alphabetized by the city name, not the state or the country. So you basically have to know the exact town that you're looking for and hope that it's actually in the game, otherwise browsing is a chore. The basics of career mode are that you pick a fight offer, train for that fight with actual drills, go fight, and then do it all over again. Training in a drill will give you a letter grade based on how well you did. Once you get a grade that you like, you can sim that training from there on at that same grade result. You'll also have to be careful how you train though, as you'll be subject to random injuries that will lower some of your attributes. Other random events will pop up and affect your training as well. Things like family visiting you to binge watching TV shows can have an effect on how well you train, or how much you train even. I both like and hate the random events. I like that there is a dynamic system in place to vary the results of your fight training, but it can also be very frustrating to see these things pop up, especially if the fight ahead is really important. You'll also get short notice fight offers that have a nice risk-reward system to them. You'll have less time to train for these fights, but if you win, you'll get more fans and make a bigger push in progression. By winning fights, you'll receive evolution points that you can spend on perks and new moves. Most of the perks consist of losing less stamina and things like that. There's nothing crazy. The new moves consist of strikes, takedowns, transitions, and submissions. To start your career, you'll go through The Ultimate Fighter, a reality TV show in which two teams of fighters basically square off in a tournament. From there, you go on to the rankings for whichever weight class your fighter is in. It's really basic stuff and is pretty easy in the beginning, but boy does the difficulty jump. As a 75 overall fighter, I was fighting Uriah Faber, who was a 100 overall. Needless to say, I was absolutely humbled, and I pretty much traded off wins and losses from there on out. You have a retirement meter that fills up after every fight, and the more damage you take, the more the meter fills up. It's pretty intense watching your meter fill as your career goes on, knowing you may only have a few fights left in you, and you need to make them count. I was also told when it was time for my last fight, and was able to win, riding off into the sunset with a respectable record. Career mode also simulates the UFC world as you play through your career. Championships will change hands, cards will be built, and this is all really awesome, but the way it's presented is less than ideal. If you want to know what's happening as it happens, you'll need to go into a sub-menu, wait for everything to load, and read. It doesn't sound too bad except for when you have to do it every 10 minutes or so. I'm not sure why they couldn't be a main menu feed for convenience's sake. There is a championship feed right on the main menu, which is nice, but that doesn't tell us everything that's going on in our UFC world. It just tells us who's the champion and what the rankings are. UFC 2's career mode is not unlike Madden's franchise mode. It's there, it's playable, but honestly I have no real desire to go back and play it again, except for maybe using a woman next time around. And speaking of not unlike Madden, the developers managed to squeeze in an Ultimate Team mode, and the way they have implemented it into the world of UFC is rather interesting. Instead of collecting cards of certain fighters to make a team, you create your own fighters and build them up with moves, boosts, and training cards. It's sort of a career mode in its own right, but you can play online against other people. If you've seen my Madden review or know me well, you know I don't really care for Ultimate Team-like modes in any game. I think the card collecting is cool and can be a lot of fun, but the monetization is something that I don't think is healthy for the future of these titles. It's clearly healthy for the pockets of the publishers, but I'm not a huge fan of how this is affecting the more meatier areas of the game, like career modes and franchise mode. I fought about 10 matches in Ultimate Team and went 7-3, most of my wins coming via submission or decision. It was fun, but the fun part was mainly fighting against others online, and not so much the card portion. I don't see EA making a ton of money off of this mode like they do with FIFA or Madden, so I expect them to use the fighter cards route for the next game. I really don't have anything else to say about UFC Ultimate Team. UFC UT? Cut? Ugh. One of the things I like most about UFC 2 is the ability to make your own fight cards and play or watch through them. I'm one of those people who like to watch video games sometimes more than I like playing them, and this mode allowed me to set up my card and just have it running in the background while I did other work. You can set up championship matches, select your rounds, difficulty, arena location, referee for each match. There are some great options here. However, there could be a lot more to it. I'd love something like universe mode we see in WWE games, so that I can have my own living MMA universe going on. And really, that's the overall problem with UFC 2, is that it feels very closed off. It doesn't feel like I have a whole lot of control. I'm playing the UFC experience, and if I get bored of looking at the uniformity of UFC, too bad. Given I don't watch the UFC, but are the fighters really that limited with what they wear? I mean, you basically get to choose from 4 different gear options before the fight, and the big difference between all of those is that one set is white and the other set is black. There are smaller differences like repping your nationality with colored letters, and if it's a championship fight you can get some gold on your trunks, but really, I was pretty disappointed to see the lack of options here. All complaints aside, UFC 2 is a fun game. It may or may not keep you drawn in though, and that's definitely an area of improvement for the next game that needs to be focused on. I got a lot of enjoyment out of it, but I'm ready to move on after about 15 hours now. If you're really into MMA, UFC 2 should mostly hit what you're aiming for. For those who are on the MMA fringe, it might not be enough to make you feel whole. Be wary if you're looking to pay full price, but if you can find it on sale for $40 or less, I think UFC 2 is worth the price of that admission. I give UFC 2 3.5 stars out of 5.